workshop speaker for today is Jack, and he's going to share with us the history of NA.
Hi, my name's Jack. I'm an addict. I guess based on the topic, I must be an old addict. I'm not denying it. I'm grateful to be one. Never expected to be an old addict. And I certainly never expected to be sharing on the history of Narcotics Anonymous. And I guess I want to start off with a couple of things to date me as to my involvement in Narcotics Anonymous. I remember NA meetings when you used to be able to smoke in them. I also remember NA meetings where the people who came up to read could read all by themselves. I should stop there. I'm doing good now. So thank you very much. Any questions? I want to share that this has been the most difficult meeting that I have ever felt like I had to share on. As in all cases, when I'm asked to share or do something in Narcotics Anonymous, I don't think about it. I say yes, and then think about it. Actually, I'm not even sure I was told, do you want to speak on the history of NA first, or do you want to, we have a workshop for you, you want to do it? Whichever way it was, I said yes, and it took about 2 weeks before it started kind of going in my head, oh shit. This ain't just coming to share about your story, you know. I know that, and I know that whatever comes out about what I have to share in Narcotics Anonymous is my story, and that's it. Nobody can argue with it. Nobody could, you know. I mean, you can, but who cares? But this is the history of Narcotics Anonymous. And even in my story, you could argue with the dates I might throw out, which I would never throw out, because I got a memory like a sieve. So right away I started to panic. Oh, damn, what the hell am I going to do? You know, and, well, you know, to really do a good history of Narcotics Anonymous, I'd have to go out and do a hell of a lot of research. I'm not likely to do that. And I didn't do a lot of research, but I did some, and I really went through changes to wanting to say, hey, you know what, get somebody else. There's got to be somebody who, and there are people, you know. Bob's done the history of Narcotics Anonymous once or twice before, and there are other people that could speak on the history of NA. And then I started thinking, okay, how can I make, you know, well, even if I had a good memory, NA's has been around since '53. It's a long time. And NA is a big fellowship and a huge program. No one person could possibly tell the history of Narcotics Anonymous. I could talk about some of the stuff I've read, and that's why I brought notes. Whether I talk about what's on these notes or not, I still don't know. But I can't talk about the history of Narcotics Anonymous, because the history of Narcotics Anonymous isn't just the first 20 or 25 years of our infancy and the formation and how we began, but it's, you know, the beginning of Narcotics Anonymous in many, many cities and countries, which is all part of the history. And there's no one person that can speak about all of those. So then I thought, okay, one way to get me off the hook is let's get 4 or 5 people to participate in this workshop. And I thought, that's the answer. That'll kind of lighten my load. And so I asked, which is unusual, I asked for permission to bring some other people in that might be at the convention to, to tell their history from their perspective. And so, I kept going through all of these rumblings on what am I going to do, and then I started reading some stuff, and I listened to a couple of tapes that I had, and then I started to realize that I did have some information from my perspective, and that's what I'm going to talk about. NA history from Jack's perspective. I do not guarantee 100% accuracy. And I don't know that it's necessary. I hope to leave plenty of time for people to come up and ask questions, and I'm grateful to see that there are some people in this room who can certainly add things in response to questions you might have that I may not have responses to. Basically, at least from the research I did do, and from early remembrances of, because I was privileged. I came to this program over 25 years ago in 1971, and I've never been away for more than about a week or so, and I've been clean ever since June of 1972. And I'm so, obviously, how can I not be grateful to be clean for over 24 years, but I'm also so grateful to have come into this fellowship at the young age I came in here, 6 for those of you that are counting. And to come into Narcotics Anonymous, I came into a treatment program that Narcotics Anonymous technically referred me to. So things have changed. I don't think you're going to get a referral from the World Service Office anymore to any treatment programs. But 25 years ago, they did refer me to a treatment program that was just a few blocks away from the World Service Office. And that had its advantages because actually, the recovery house was run by a member of the Board of Trustees of Narcotics Anonymous, and that continued for a long time. I don't know what, and I don't know. There was controversy back then about it. There's probably would still be controversy. Personally, I don't see a big deal. But I don't want to. I'm going to try to stay away from politics. I don't know how well I'll do at that. And it's fun not to sometimes. So, but anyway, I came in at a time, and in a location where I was privileged to be surrounded by people that had some history with Narcotics Anonymous. Jimmy Kennan, whose name I have no problem mentioning, and to the best of my recollection, is what I would consider the founder of Narcotics Anonymous as we know it. Not that he did it alone, nor did he ever, to my knowledge, ever claim to have been the founder of Narcotics Anonymous. I don't think I ever heard those words out of his mouth. And clearly, he recognized the fact that many people had to do with the founding of Narcotics Anonymous. And obviously today that's the case. Because no one person could find this. He was key in the early days to keeping it together. Based on the research that I have, in 1947 there was a wonderful place in Kentucky, Lexington, that many people got to go to rehabilitate at, and they had meetings that originally were called narco meetings and eventually ended up being called Addicts Anonymous meetings. Somewhere around that time, Danny Carlson in the New York State prison system began something that was called Narcotics Anonymous. And when Danny went back into New York, he began to hold Narcotics Anonymous meetings in I think the Salvation Army and eventually other places throughout New York. And to the best of my knowledge, they utilized steps. I don't know if they utilized all 12. The traditions didn't exist yet, so they obviously didn't utilize the traditions. Around 1950 in Los Angeles, a program called Habit Forming Drug Groups started. There are people here that can tell you a hell of a lot more about it than I can. Not a hell of a lot of people here that can do that, but there's one or two here that can do that. Addicts Anonymous around 52 started in Los Angeles that utilized the steps. Based on the tapes I listened to and some of the readings that I did, it seemed that Jimmy certainly didn't feel that they utilized the traditions very well. And as often happens around here, and I think many of us have experienced, not only just with the traditions, but people either take or get pushed into leadership positions and then get carried away with those leadership positions where they're the only one who has anything to say. And at least according to what I read and listened to, it was certainly Jimmy's perception that that's what occurred in most of the habit forming drugs and Addicts Anonymous in Los Angeles, and eventually they folded. In 53 was basically the beginning of Narcotics Anonymous as we know it in Los Angeles, in the San Fernando Valley, and Jimmy said that he was the first chairman of what was called San Fernando Valley Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. Jimmy says he didn't want it to be called that, and the group that existed at the time voted him down. As he indicated, they voted him down on most everything, which sounds familiar too. Jimmy later also reports, not too much later, I think that this was in July of 53 when they were forming, and in September of 53 they received a response from the General Service Office of Alcoholics Anonymous granting permission to utilize and adapt the 12 steps and the 12 traditions, but by no means could they use the name Alcoholics Anonymous. So Jimmy was very happy about that. And so they changed the name to Narcotics Anonymous. In October, apparently was the first meeting, at least that they identified as the first meeting of the newly formed NA, and it was in North Hollywood, California. By the end of 1953, all members of the committee resigned, but which also sounds familiar. But the meetings continued. As the 50s ended, so did New York's NA. Danny Carlson apparently passed away in 56, and they continued to try to keep the Narcotics Anonymous that existed in New York going, and did for several years. But since they never had adopted the traditions, and it certainly, I would imagine, would have been difficult to adopt the traditions when the traditions, I guess, came out in the early 50s. At any rate, that may have had something to do with their not being able to continue. The laws in New York also made it very difficult for many years before Narcotics Anonymous was actually to begin again in New York. Also, I guess at the end of that decade, in '59 or so, all the meetings in Southern California also disappeared due to personality conflicts and not following the traditions very well. Also uncovered, and I'm sure I'll be corrected if this is incorrect. I'm sure I'll be corrected quickly, that it says Bob B. finds NA in 1959. Okay. Yeah? No? Yeah. First little white book was published in '62 with no stories. In '64, the Board of Trustees formed for the purpose of ensuring that NA doesn't die again. Essentially, for those of you that have been around a while, for a while might remember when the trustees were basically supposedly the overseers of the traditions. And essentially that apparently is where that came from, since when they began to form again, certainly the commitment was to continue to make sure that the traditions get adhered to. 65, Northern California NA began. In '66, second little white book of Narcotics Anonymous was published, this time with stories. '67, '68, the parent general service organization of Narcotics Anonymous formed in Bill B's barbershop. Jimmy designed the NA symbol while in a hospital fighting tuberculosis around 1968. The ideal service structure was approved in 1969. It was 2 pages long. And And when I got to this program in '71, and when I got involved in service in '72, that 2-page service structure was still what was in practice and in use. And as things began to gradually progress, I remember thinking what a brilliant service structure this was. I thought this was really brilliant. And then especially being able to be around and seeing it, because what was on paper didn't exist. It didn't exist when I got here. So the beauty was to see it actually begin to blossom and happen. And to be a part of that was very exciting. And now when I look back, as I have looked back on a lot of things in NA, when I was doing this, I guess my home group, basically for probably 23 of the 24 years I've been clean, is a Tuesday night step study. And many Tuesday nights I find myself realizing that the best piece of literature we have is a little white book, because it doesn't describe what the steps are, because any description you begin to give complicates and confuses it. Or at least I certainly feel that way. And the longer I stay clean, I find that, what's to interpret about the steps? They tell you exactly what they are and what to do. And we can write, and I'm not talking against having literature, because I find a tremendous value in having literature to read to put me in touch with certain things. But for keeping things simple, the white book, to me, is the best piece of literature on what the steps and traditions are, because they don't try to explain it. And that's what, and that's what I began to see about that 2-page service structure. It was real simple. We have complicated a very simple service structure with monuments of literature. At any rate, that's my opinion and an observation. In 1970, there were 20 meetings worldwide. 1971 was the first Narcotics Anonymous convention at the La Mirada Country Club in La Mirada, California. I think Sylvia and Jack Whaley spoke at that convention, as well as many other people. I thought I read somewhere that there were something like 315 people registered. I read somewhere else that there were 200 people there. Things have changed a little bit. As a matter of fact, This might be the convention, the first world convention in this room. 1972, World Service Office, first location. And I guess first location other than Jimmy's house and other than a variety of members' trunks. Not bathing trunks, but car trunks. Well, maybe bathing trunks, I don't know. By 72, there were 70 NA meetings worldwide. WCNA-2 was in North Hollywood, California. The reason why I wore this is because I don't have a list of all of them, so in case I forget any or anybody wants to know, I can just turn around. San Fernando Valley Area Service Committee, originally called the San Fernando Valley GSO, began, and that was the first, that was the beginning of the blossoming, to me, of this two-page service structure, because it was the first area service committee in Narcotics Anonymous to form, and was really the beginning for me. Well, I guess the beginning for me was attending the Southern California GSO as a representative of a meeting that I was secretary of. And, but the real beginning was the beginning of the San Fernando Valley Area Service Committee, to participate in the forming of something that was new, that was bringing this dream more into fruition. Was very interesting, was fun at that time to be a part of. And like many of you, we had to sit in many meetings where there was some heated conversations. The Southern California General Service Organization wasn't very pleased, and I think basically trying to figure out what the hell are those guys up to, and there was a lot of stuff. There was a lot of controversy. There was a lot of stuff that goes on when something new is happening. Obviously, it was the right thing to do. And while I didn't particularly learn it then, because I continued to participate for many years in a lot of heated conversations and discussions, a lot of discussions in a variety of places, not always in service committee meetings, but sometimes in back doors, in cars, and telephone calls, and all kinds of things to plan how we can ensure that the thing that we know is right can happen, so that we can have everything formed and in place when we get into the service committee meetings, because there were people that didn't think like us, who obviously didn't know what was happening. And that's that's part of the problem. The one thing, after all these years being involved in service, it's become clear to me that everybody's as convinced, whether they agree with me or not, as I am, that that's the right thing to do, whatever you believe in. I have wondered a few times about a few people, but in reality, for the overwhelming majority of time that I've been involved, I haven't seen anybody who was looking for a way to destroy this fellowship. But the other side of that reality, too, is based on my understanding of the traditions, is every one of us has played a role in doing something to tear apart this fellowship, as much as we have contributed and done things to pull this fellowship together. Because that's what the traditions tell me, and became real clear that the traditions were there to protect me from me and protect you from me. Because left to my own devices, if it was left to me, this fellowship wouldn't be where it's at now. If it were left to any one of us, it probably wouldn't be where it is. But we've had to go through all of this stuff, and later on, I was privileged to become a member of the Board of Trustees. Actually, I think I was the last trustee elected to what was a never-ending term as a trustee. And in spite of the fact that all this wisdom said that the trustees shouldn't have terms, the fellowship said, bullshit. You guys need to have terms that end at some point. And at some point, you guys got to kind of go and move out of the way. You know? I mean, I was new enough not to have a commitment one way, and I don't really remember tremendous amount of argument against it. But I mean, that's the way it works. It doesn't matter. Fellowship decided, and that's the way it's been. And I think it's served the fellowship well to have terms. Thank God. I might still be a trustee. But being a trustee taught me a lot. I was talking to someone that's on the board of trustees that recently got elected, and we were just talking, and I shared with him that my perception is being a member of the board of trustees did a hell of a lot more for me than I believe that anything I did has done for the fellowship. And I'm absolutely certain of that, because it allowed me to grow up. It forced me to mature to some degree, at some other people's expense, but it forced me to mature. And I learned. I learned about this thing called God too, because it doesn't. The ties that bind us together are stronger than those that will tear us apart. But what I learned, I had to learn the other part of that. That there are things in play, basically our disease, that will tear us apart. And the ties are obviously stronger because look at where we are today. This is an incredible, from where things were at the time when I came into this program and where it is today is incredible. To not only be clean for 24 years, but to be a part of, as everybody plays a part in the growth of Narcotics Anonymous in some way, shape, or form. This is a we program, and that was one of the other things that I think was very significant in the forming of Narcotics Anonymous in our history, was the adaptation and changing the steps and traditions to we. And obviously to place the role and responsibility for all of us to utilize the traditions. Also in '73, WCNA-3 was held in San Jose, California, and there was a 20th anniversary banquet that Bob led the meeting, and Jimmy Kinnon and Jack Whaley spoke at. That tape, I think, is available through the World Service Office. At any rate, it certainly was where I got some of this information. And I had the privilege to be in attendance at that banquet as well. In '74, the World Service Office moved to Highland Avenue in California, and WCNA-4 was held in Anaheim, California, at which point I had another interesting experience in how things worked in Narcotics Anonymous in those days. The closest thing to a World Service Conference that existed usually occurred at the conventions in those days. And at the Anaheim World Convention in '74, there was a service meeting, and the wonders of service then was whoever showed up got to vote. And by this time, I was working in that treatment program that I first entered in '71, and the group had decided to incorporate, not for the first time or for the last time, the World Service Office. And so to do that, they decided to elect an interim board officers to pull that off, to incorporate the World Service Office. And so they had an election of which I became the chairperson. And I don't know if I would have if it wasn't for the recovery house I was in. I'm not sure what the votes would have ended up, but there was someone running around telling all the residents of that treatment program to vote for Jack. And since it was the director of the program, they listened. I got a lot of votes. And so there were 3 of us elected, and 3 or 4 of us, I think there was 4 of us, chairperson, vice chairperson, secretary. Maybe there was only 3. There couldn't possibly have been a treasurer. But we got together a few times. You know, we went and got the forms for incorporating, and really, I don't think we ever did much with incorporating the World Service Office. What it did for me is it got me to feel that I needed to be more involved with the World Service Office, and so I started to go down to the Highland office and watch Bob and learn what went on at the World Service Office at the Highland Avenue. And I used to go down there most every Saturday, as I recall. And eventually, as I began doing it more and more, Bob began doing it less and less, which I learned from, because I did it later on the same way. But I got involved with the World Service Office, and if I recall correctly, we were paying the exorbitant amount of $50 a month, which was a hardship at that time. And an opportunity came along. I don't remember exactly when in this, but somewhere around 1974, late 74, early 75, to move the World Service Office to Suicide Prevention Center in Los Angeles. And as I began to look into that possibility, especially since we were going to be able to do it for $1 a month, obviously the traditions came into play as to whether or not that was appropriate to move it into another organization. But as I looked into that, I also saw that there was a separate address and a separate entrance, and we could get our own phone, and people calling in would never know that they were calling the Suicide Prevention Center, because the person that picked up the phone hopefully was going to answer at Narcotics Anonymous. And it had its own address, so to me it seemed that it was okay to move it into a Suicide Prevention Center. But not everybody agreed with that. And so there was a lot of controversy. And for the first time, not for the last time, but for the first time, I really found myself kind of torn, because there were, both of these sides that were arguing. And I knew I was going to either be an asshole or a good guy. And Jimmy was the one who really straightened me out and said, hey, you're going to be both. And he said the good news, and maybe the bad news is that what's going to happen is the people that are going to call you a good guy and pat you on the back for this decision are going to probably be the ones kicking your ass for the next decision you make that they disagree with. He said, if you want to stay in service, get used to it, because that's the way it is. And the only way not to get criticized is to do nothing. And that's the way it's been. That's the way it's been. I've gotten kicked in the ass, and I've gotten patted on the back. And you know what? I don't know which ones are which, and it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I learned a long time ago, I've had people accuse me of saying things that I certainly didn't think I said. And again, that works both ways. I've had people come up and after I speak and say, God, gee, thanks a lot. Man, you saved my life. And they run this thing down there. I'm walking away. I said that? I didn't think I said that, but that's what they heard. That's all that matters, because I took the credit for it. I didn't say, no, I didn't say that. So I began to realize, wait, if I'm going to do that, then when I get kicked in the ass, I got to accept that too. It's okay. It's okay. That's all part of being part of this fellowship. And if you're passionate about this fellowship, if you're passionate about other addicts having the opportunity that you've been so freely given, then you're in for that. And it's okay. And the most difficult thing to be able to come to is to the point of it being okay. It's okay now. And it doesn't mean I might not get into an argument 15 minutes from now about something relating to this fellowship. But I know that I always retreat, even when I'm absolutely I'm never absolutely 100% certain I'm right. I'm often 99% certain I'm right, but I always leave that little bit, and I always, if there's argument, try as best I can to listen to what the other side is. And the real key around here in service is to be able to learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. And it's not easy. It's not easy. I mean, the first time you try to ride a bicycle, you fall on your ass. The first time you try to not be disagreeable, you're going to fall on your ass and you're going to be disagreeable. But that's where the steps come in. The most difficult part that often happens, and it certainly, I think, happened with me. I mean, I was encouraged strongly by my sponsor to get involved in service when I had less than a year. But I guess in 1971, that was pretty common anyway. I mean, you might wear 5 or 6 hats in 1971 and 72 and early 70s. As a matter of fact, my first wife in recovery held a secretary of a meeting through many relapses, with everybody's knowledge that she relapsed. Okay, is she clean today? Yeah, okay. We want you to continue to serve in that position. I don't think that would fly today in most places, but it might need to fly somewhere. There are still places where there is no Narcotics Anonymous. So things have definitely changed. As usual, as I struggled through all of this, I wondered, well, am I going to last 10 or 15 minutes talking about this? And then I remembered the first time I spoke at an NA meeting. And up until then, I had never been able to share in a meeting for more than 2 or 3 minutes because it was so terrifying. And the first time I spoke as a speaker at a meeting, I was supposed to share for 40 minutes, and I spoke for an hour and 15 minutes. Fortunately, the program has taught me occasionally to talk to other people. And I've talked to a lot of people the last few weeks about really being terrified about speaking, being very nervous about speaking on this, because this is something that's very meaningful to me. And the encouragement I've gotten in all of those conversations is ultimately what began to make it set. Even though I continued to be nervous, is basically I knew that, hey, I'm asked to share on something and I can do it. And as I began to try to control and manage and manipulate, okay, I'll get 3 or 4 people, I'll have all these notes, I'll try and get all this stuff right in a row, I began to realize that, hey, you know what, I've wanted to do that in many, many other cases, and I've just left it to God, and it's happened, and whatever was supposed to be, whatever it is that I had to share is what would come out. I don't want to talk a heck of a lot longer because I do want to leave, open it to questions, because an interesting thing happened at the end of the last meeting in here. When I came in, was that someone asked me a question that I would have never thought about, that it really has to do with the history of Narcotics Anonymous. And the question they asked me was about key tags. How come there's only a welcome chip and a 30-day and a 60-day and a 90-day? How come there's not a 4-month chip and a 5-month chip? And where did that come along? And wow. And it hit me when he asked me. I said, wow, that's an interesting part of history. His perspective is that there has always been those chips. My memory serves me correctly, in 1971 when I got in here, there was no welcome chip. There was no 60-day chip. My memory serves me correctly, there was only a 30, 90, 6-month, and 9-month chip. and cakes were very rare. Uh, and where that comes from is exactly where a lot of our stuff came from in the beginning. It came from, as best as I know, Alcoholics Anonymous. Those are the chips they gave out. Those are the chips we gave out. I've been involved with this AA, NA struggle. You know, I've gone through periods where in my own sharing of my story, as I feel guilty at even mentioning the fact that I once went to AA meetings, and that is so unfortunate at how some of our growth, even though it's understandable, it doesn't, to me it's understandable, doesn't make it unfortunate. That there has had to have been this tremendous outcry against something that we have no opinion on. You know, and I was reminded in listening to that 20th celebration, because I think Jack really put it really well. Jack really talked about at that time, and I don't know that anybody in 1973 didn't attend both AA and NA. Those of us that were members of Narcotics Anonymous, I believe, attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as well. And Jack put it really simply. He said, I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a member of Narcotics Anonymous. And his talk that night was on pride for membership, of membership with Narcotics Anonymous. And then he also went on to say that he was also a member of the PTA. So what? Why does anybody care about... Nobody did care that he was a member of PTA, but many of us had issues about the fact that some of our members were members of Alcoholics Anonymous. The point that he made about it is when he goes to the PTA, he doesn't talk about the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous, nor does he talk about his drug addiction, any more than he talks about his alcoholism. So when he goes to AA, he doesn't talk about the 12 steps of Narcotics Anonymous or his drug addiction. He talks about his alcoholism and his involvement in AA. And when he's in NA, he gives NA the same respect. And to me, it's that simple, especially since we don't have an opinion on all these other things. Do we? But I also understand, you know, my personal way, I guess, of viewing this AA-NA thing is the same way I view the way many of us deal with having to find our own identity and breaking away from our parents. You know, we rebel, we fight, they don't know nothing. My parents, Leah last night I think said, geez, I sound like my mother. I found myself saying that many times. I think that's what Narcotics Anonymous needed to do, you know, because it did need to break away from Mom. That's exactly what we all need to do. You know, many of us spend many hours in therapy and writing inventories and talking to our sponsors to break away from Mom. It's a difficult process. It has been a difficult process for Narcotics Anonymous. I think we're standing on our own. I think it's time to leave it alone. And just as I realized at some point in my own recovery that the hate that I personally felt that through most of my recovery from my mother needed to stop. Because I realized how hypocritical I was by talking, you know, feeling and acting as though I hated my mother when I sat in NA meetings and talked about how grateful I was to be alive. How can I hate the person who gave me this life that I claim to be grateful for? I had to end that hatred. I had to end that feud because I needed to show the gratitude to the person who brought me into this life. And I believe we need to do the same with AA. Doesn't mean we need to BAA. Doesn't mean anything outside of acknowledgement for what played a significant role. Because I don't know if Narcotics Anonymous would exist if AA didn't precede us. At any rate, as I said, I wouldn't get into any political issues, and I got one of the other things I want to share, because I think it was, at least to me, it was profound, in spite of ourselves kind of thing, was in, like I said, I don't remember years at all. '77, I think it was 70. The World Service, the World Convention was held in San Francisco. At that convention, again, we had a meeting to determine where the next convention would be. California had 2 bids in, and California had a meeting preceding. They had a regional meeting preceding the convention to decide if they were going to present both conventions or just one. They decided to present both of them and leave it up to the group conscience. At the meeting where we were deciding on where the convention would be, some people happened to stumble in there from Houston, Texas, not even knowing that there was going to be a convention. You know how those Texans are. And said, hey, we want to put in a bid too. They didn't have one. Being the open fellowship we are, we accepted their bid. And I believe, if I remember correctly, California still had another opportunity to decide to put one of the bids forward, and chose to put both of them forward. And I believe that was God working in our lives to do for us what we wouldn't have had the sense to do by ourselves. Because if California would have known what the outcome was, they would have put one convention site forward, and the convention would have continued for the 8th year to be in California. But because they didn't do that, the convention finally got the hell out of California, which was the appropriate thing for it to do. This was a world convention, and again, this is, all the things, the kinds of things that people get caught up in. There were many people in California that were angry that the convention moved outside of California, and I never understood that. This is World Convention of Narcotics Anonymous, not California Convention of Narcotics Anonymous. And so it moved, and again, and not for the last time, did I realize that there was something much greater than any of us moving things, because in spite of ourselves, the right things seem to happen time and time again. I discovered that as a trustee in the early days when there were all these constant threats, and I don't know, maybe the constant threats are still there, that there's these groups of folks that would want to see NA torn apart, or if this motion gets passed, NA is going to fall apart, and there's going to be 5 or 6 NAs out there, and all of this crazy stuff that we all believed was so serious that we manipulated and politic. I mean, I don't know what happens on the floor of the legislature or Congress, but those are the fantasies I have, all the backroom deals and all this hustling and bustling to make sure that the right thing happens. And I remember one particular conference that I wasn't attending, that I was running around doing the same shit that everybody else was doing, that I was criticizing for doing, and I was politicking and manipulating along with everybody else. And while that was going on, the conference was about doing their business, and the very thing we were in the middle of politicking on, they voted on without any of our input, without any of our manipulation. And guess what? The conference made the right decision. They did the right thing. And when I saw that, I said, holy shit, man. Boy, I'm exhausted for nothing. And the reality is I knew that it didn't matter what the conference decided. Personally for me, I was a member of Narcotics Anonymous, and that was the group that decided. Whatever they decide, that's the way it is. And it always happens because God does express himself through our group conscience. Anyway, I want to thank the committee for asking me. This is truly a privilege and an honor. It always is to participate in Narcotics Anonymous. This is, to me, a special honor to be able to share on the history of Narcotics Anonymous. And I want to thank you for asking me. And I'd like to, I think we have about 25 minutes to, if anyone has questions or some history that you'd like to share from your perspective.
We're going to open the meeting for sharing. And if you'd like to share, you may go to either of the microphones or for questions.
I'm an addict named Ron.
Ron?
I still want to know about the key tags. When they changed from chips to key tags, I remember in our area, first we had chips, then the key tags come out, and then we had both. And I know the 18-month come out after I'd been around for a while. And what is the history with that?
To be honest, I couldn't, and maybe somebody else can share the history of it. I don't even know if we've switched formally or not. And if the World Service Office has, we got chips and key tags still, right? Yeah, right? Yeah. So it's a matter of your choice. You want chips? Because I see both. I still see both. Somewhere along the line, somebody got innovative. Somebody suggested something different, and it was accepted and adopted, and now there's key tags, but both are available.
The 18-month key tag was a result of motion by a region at the World Service Conference because people had trouble making it from a year home without some little reward. So they introduced the 18-month key tag and then followed up with another motion for the 18-month medallion. So all those things were created by regional conscience and were voted on at the World Service Conference by the regional service representatives.
Thank you. Thank you, Timothy.
My name's Harold, and I'm an addict.
Hi, Harold.
Can we hope for a book sometime soon about NA history? I mean,
Well, yeah, you can. You don't have to hope. There will be one. For many years, I personally have talked about wanting one, as have many other members talked about wanting to have a book on the history of Narcotics Anonymous. Several years ago, or I don't know, maybe as much as 8 or 9 or 10 years ago, it occurred to me that while we tried to put material together on the history of Narcotics Anonymous, it would be a very difficult thing to ever put through the service structure, simply because the overwhelming majority of people, how could you possibly vote on it? How can you vote on accepting the history of Narcotics Anonymous when the overwhelming majority of the fellowship knows very little about the history of Narcotics Anonymous? So it would be a very difficult task. This may be an outside issue, so I won't get into the specifics, but there is a book that outlines quite a bit of our history that is coming out, that was written by a non-member who's since passed away. And the book will be out in a couple of months, and I'm sure you'll be hearing about it and have the opportunity to order it.
I'm an addict. My name is George.
Hi, George.
I heard or read in a few different places that when first the NA meetings were held, that they had to move from area to area because the cops were busting down and stuff like that. I was just wondering if that was true and a little bit on that.
Well, Bob, he asked about whether there was any truth about the cops breaking down doors and busting NA meetings, and that's why they had to move about. I didn't never heard that the cops ever quite did that, but they move. Huh?
Step up to the mic, Bob.
My name is Bob, and I'm an addict. I think Jack done an excellent job on perspective. You have to realize that, say, addicts weren't welcome anywhere. We had more fear involved in terms of where we congregated at any given time. And we was always suspect of the law being looking at what was going on, and very often they were. They would sit way down the street or whatever and see what activity went on. But we had very little intrusion of them coming into meetings and actually disrupting a meeting. On a couple of occasions, there was occasion where addicts were within the running or hiding or whatever the case may be. They came into meetings and got a couple of addicts out of those meetings. You know, my parole officer and me had hard times and bad times, and and he knew where to find me at any particular time at a meeting, so he'd come and get me, because I wouldn't do what he told us to do. So that's, we have causations to be under the watchful eye of the law at any given time. We're not too pure when we're talking about in the life that we lived. So we may be under observation under that occasion if you know to be hanging out at a certain place and they need to find you. But that, I don't know of any occasions where they said the meeting doors have been kicked down. On a few occasions, they've been respectful and say, "I want you. I'm looking for him and him. Will you? Let's go." But that's usually the only case I've known for that to occur. So, what can I tell you? Okay. Mm-hmm.
But that didn't stop the New York City Narcotics squad from sending in some undercover agents
Mm-hmm.
to mingle with us in New York to find out because they didn't believe the lie is dead.
That's true.
They believe once an addict is always an addict.
Mm-hmm.
So they sent in undercover narcotics agents to see if they could score some dope there and what we were really about.
Yeah, right. That's very true. They do things.
And they left us alone.
They just left. That's right. Let's
But
say.
we were under surveillance at that time.
Oh yeah.
1983
Oh yeah.
in New York.
Hey, we can't control those people around us. That's one of the things we have to realize, that we're a suspect at any given occasion. We just gained some respectability within the last 5 to 10 years. We are a respected group of people today. We can go where we could not have gone 15, 20 years ago. So much so, I have to think about, like a country like Australia. If you had a record, and you had, especially a drug record, you could forget about going over there for doing anything. And when we had a convention there, we were able to go to the consulate, and they respectfully, looked at our papers and, and admitted that we were felons and what have you, and they gave us permission to go to these here particular places without being restricted. That's a tremendous away from where we came from.
We have one speaker to my left I'd like to recognize, and then we'll go back to
I'm an addict. My name's Nate.
Hi, Nate.
Could Jack or Bob or somebody talk about the growth of regions, late 70s and 80s, and draw us a map of what the world looked like in terms of NA?
Bob might want to do that, or some of you may want to just come up. That's why I invited people to share. Certainly, I think it was around the mid-70s, in around 75 in California, as other areas began to follow suit, just as they did in the San Fernando Valley, the START area. Other groups began to form and started areas, and eventually it became obvious that the Southern California General Service Organization needed to begin to break up into regional service organizations for the same reasons that the areas needed to break up. And I know that Philadelphia also, I believe, in the mid-'70s or so, began doing the same thing. Historically, I don't know what the breakdown of regions was. I know Greg, I think, in the mid-'70s or 76 or so, when the tree was being put together, I know Greg put together a map of the world and some of the regions that consisted of at that time. Those of you that I don't remember, was the map part of the tree when it was published? At that conference that was held at the convention in San Francisco. San Fernando.
If you want to find out about the history of Narcotics Anonymous, there is a exhibit
Thank you.
which is it's been put together by the World Service Office down on the first floor, down from the hall. And you go out to where the terrace is, to where the place where everybody can smoke. Going out the hall, it's on your right there, and it has all the old service manuals, all the versions of the basic text. It's got a map of the world showing where the meetings are. If you want to find out about where we came from, that's where you can go and be a part of it.
Thank you, Tim. Did everyone hear it? Okay, good.
Hi, my name is Leonard. I'm from Chicago.
Hi, Leonard.
And that may have answered my question because I wanted to know who started the first meeting in Chicago and where was it, if anybody knows when it actually was.
And if anyone does, answer him, because I don't. 1971. Well, we've done a pretty good job reproducing around here.
Addict named Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Excellent job, Jack.
Thank you.
Question that I ask is when Narcotics Anonymous adapted the 12 traditions, specifically the 5th tradition, there's one word that is different from the Alcoholics Anonymous tradition, the and it. Was there any specific reason that this was done, or was it something that was just overlooked? Do you have anything on that?
It's probably a typo. I don't know. I don't know that. But
The only reason they keep calling me, I'm history myself. It's like most languages. Languages have changes, and we're constantly updating as to what's, I say, politically correct. And they felt that was old English, that was the way it was presented before, and they wanted to correct it. And they found out that within the parameters of correction, by using these and those, by making that change, they felt that it was incorrect the way it was. And they found out, and they checked with the English, all the English professionals, and find out it would be just correct by changing the these to those, or those to these. Which one? For these, yeah, because it was talking about those steps as to these steps, and that's the reason why it was changed.
Yeah, where a difference between the message and its message in the fifth tradition.
Once again, we're talking about what would be correct as far as presenting the English or the message. You could use that in the proper language. Because we found in the last 10 years, language have changed. You know, words that were 20 years down the line are not what is in use today. We found that it was incorrect from then, as far as we know it, because of whoever the people that put language together have made their changes. And it's hard for us to make that transition of changes in our mind when we're used to using it another way. So once again, we're talking about changes that has nothing to do with you personally in a sense of speaking, but language change. The language that you might present today as being correct, 10 years from now, whoever comes along will tell you your language ain't shit. You know it. Huh? You see it happen on a regular basis, so you know that that's, and you have to kind of temper it with patience and explanations and by whatever means you can deal with it.
Thanks, Bob.
My name's Martin. I'm an addict from London, England.
Right.
And as this is a World Convention, I want to tell you a bit about how it was in England in the bad old dark days before our American friends came over to help us. NA in the UK has been going about 16 years, just over 16 years. And I've been clean just over 14 years. And my experiences in the early days are very, very similar to what Jack was speaking about. There was only a couple of NA meetings a week in London, and guys like me had to go wherever we could to get the message. And when we went to AA, we were just shown love and respect and tolerance, and you know, we'll never forget that. Before we got the World Convention in England 10 years ago, which I believe you spoke at, Jack, if I remember right, I remember there was a bit of controversy about us getting the bid the year before because it was the first year that the convention went outside of the States. And I just want to say that was definitely the right decision. The World Convention really kick-started the fellowship in England and in Europe after that. Meetings quadrupled within the year after that. Prior to that, thank you. Prior to us getting the convention in England, a few of us would go over to the States and come back to our cave dwellings and sit around the fire and talk tales of these wonderful mythical Wild West characters like Cigar Jack and Bob B and Chuck and Stu, and they're part of the fabric of NA in our country. And you know, I guess the relationship that NA in the UK has with the WSO and NA in America is the same as what Jack was talking about with the relationship with AA. It's a parent-child relationship, and without the parental figure of NA in the States, then none of it would have been possible in Europe, and there would have been nowhere for me or thousands like myself to go when we needed to go. So thank you all.
My name is Ray, and I'm an addict. This is just to address the origin of the key tags and a little bit of information that I have. And you're right, it did come from Alcoholics Anonymous. In the beginning, they kept statistics on alcoholics and when they would relapse. They kept a lot of statistics, and what they found out was that at 30 days, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, and a year, when people were most prone to relapse. So they began to give these as incentives for people to reaffirm their commitment to that program. And so we got it too today, and we seem to follow that same pattern. I think with the advent of cocaine as a major player in the drug addiction, in drug addiction, it is the most powerful, addictive substance that is known to man. And we have seen a need, I think because of that, to begin to add a little closer spaces, because we had a lot of 30-day wonders that were ping-ponging in and out, and that 60-day chip seemed to be a necessity. And I don't know when they finally got it there, but it was something that we needed in 18-month chips too. they find out that there are just particular times when the feelings of whatever it is that you've left alone appears to come back, and that's what those chips were intended to. Intended to help us just recommit or reaffirm and recognize where we were and that we needed to keep this thing. I'm glad that you did address the AANA thing, because in my area too I go through that. Why have the hate relationship when this is supposed to be about love? So I find that I have to address hate in all its forms. And the NA police did have a function and a role. And it's beginning to be to where we can stand on our own identity, and I'm an addict, and I'm staying here. This is where I belong, and I know that. And it's not as confusing as it was before. And I'm glad to hear that address, that the hate part can start to kind of die down, and we can stand on our own addiction. Thank you.
We're going to recognize you, and then I'll have to ask you to share with someone after the meeting. Jack has another comment, and we'll close the meeting after we recognize you and Jack.
All right, thank you. My name's Eric. I'm an addict from California. In my area, I've seen like an old chip, an old NA chip with the old logo on it, and it was like made out of lead, and it was kind of like a square, like rectangular thing, and I haven't seen one in a while. I think I know one person who's got one, but I was wondering how long were those in circulation, or or was that like a personal area, or maybe let's have a let's have a souvenir edition come out, and because I liked it.
I got a couple of them still left. That pewter was a personal venture. At one time, as you know, we had no money, we had no way to do anything. There was no paid employees and none of these things. We had to try to be creative, and one of them was by selling those particular chips and or buying those particular chips. And we had a particular person that used to make them for the fellowship, and that's the reason we were giving them out, and we were selling them. We were making probably a dime off of a chip, But basically, that's where they came from. It was a kind of a private venture to raise some funds. And that was all it was. They were made of pewter, and they were basically pretty much you could put anything we asked for on them. If they want 30 days on, we put 30 days on them. If you want 90 days, you put 90. Whatever you asked for, that's what we put on. But it was kind of a private enterprise thing. It had nothing to do with NA itself. In fact, it was never sanctioned by any particular committee, but self-committee.
Thanks.
As we end and continue to participate in the growth of the fellowship, I think the comment about the London Convention and the impact it had on London, the fact that the World Convention came there, we experienced that in the United States. When the convention went to Houston, the fellowship in Houston grew tremendously. When it then went to Georgia, the fellowship grew. And so when we're participating in the decisions of where some of these activities go, I think we need to put our personal desire, I'd rather have it across the street so I don't have to make much of an effort to get there, but let's think about where it's going to serve the primary purpose best. And when I was planning for this is something I just wanted to personally end this with. Is a quote from something Jimmy said at the 20th anniversary talk, and it says, "What I have to remember personally is that I'm here, and possibly all of you are here because of people who'll never be here. The newcomer is the lifeblood of this organization, always has been, always will be." God bless you. Thank you.
We'd like to make a circle and close with a third step prayer.